Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are going to look at something that is quite literally right in front of your eyes, yet completely invisible until you know exactly how to look for it. We're going to explore this really fascinating premise that language isn't just some passive vehicle we use to carry our thoughts. Actually, it's an invisible code. It's a massive matrix of choices that actively shapes our reality, our society, and even our own minds. Seriously, think about that for a second. What if every single text you read, whether it's a massive classic novel, a quick breaking news alert, or literally just a text message from a friend, had a hidden fingerprint, like a totally unique signature, left behind by author, completely unconsciously? And what if I told you there's an entire field of study dedicated to doing nothing but dusting for those exact fingerprints? Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to master this hidden code in 6 quick stages today. Decoding the language matrix, from poetry to press releases, mind, metaphor, and power, big data meets linguistics, catching criminals with words, and finally, your new linguistics superpower. Let's kick things off with part 1, decoding the language matrix. So we're stepping into the world of literary stylistics, which is basically the ultimate code-breaking tool. This quote from Paul Simpson captures the core philosophy of this whole discipline perfectly. You see, when we read a text, our default is usually to ask, okay, what does this mean? But stylistics assigns primacy of place to the language itself. We aren't just asking what a text means. We are asking exactly how the specific linguistic choices on the page actually create that meaning. It's kind of like peeking behind the curtain to look at the mechanics of a magic trick. And the foundational concept to grasp here is called foregrounding. This is simply how writers make certain elements stand out against the background of normal, everyday language. They usually do this in one of two ways, either by breaking the rules, which we call deviation, or through highly unusual regularity, like parallelism. For instance, take the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins. When he's writing about a falcon and drops in this incredibly dense alliteration like morning, morning's minion, or uses super archaic words, he's actively using foregrounding. He's making the language pop out to hack our attention so we actually feel the intense devotion in his words, rather than just passively skimming them. Moving right along to section 2, from poetry to press releases. Now, what's really interesting about this is that stylistics isn't just for dusting off old poetry books. The exact same tools we use to break down a poem can decode the everyday communication happening all around us. Just look at how grammar constructs reality in these two headlines describing the exact same event. Headline A uses the active voice. Police shoot unarmed man. The police are the active agents doing the action. But headline B uses the passive voice. Man killed in police operation. Notice how the active agent has been entirely deleted from the grammar? And the word operation frames the event as an institutional procedure rather than an act of violence. We're not taking political sides here at all. We are simply observing how a basic grammatical choice, active versus passive, completely alters the social reality that gets presented to you, the reader. And this brings us right to systemic functional linguistics, which was pioneered by M.A.K. Halliday. He proposed this wild idea that every single utterance you make is actually juggling 3 meta-functions simultaneously. First, the ideational function, which represents your experience of the world. Second, the interpersonal function, which is actively constructing your social relationship with whoever is listening. And third, the textual function, which organizes the whole thing into a message that actually makes sense. So basically, every single sentence you speak is a complex 3-act play happening all at the exact same time. Which brings us to part 3, mind, metaphor, and power. As we peel back these layers of language, we start hitting the really deep psychological and social dimensions. On the cognitive side of things, we have conceptual metaphors. Think about the phrase, argument is war. We constantly say someone attacked my position or I defended my claims. We're literally using cognitive schema to map physical, real-world conflict directly onto abstract thought. And then looking at the social side, feminist stylistics tracks this fascinating and revealing phenomenon called semantic derogation. This is the observation that words for women systematically acquire negative connotations over time. For example, the word mistress once just meant a female master, completely equal to the male version, but it shifted over time to mean an extramarital partner. Or take spinster. That used to be a totally neutral occupation, someone who spins yarn, but it gradually morphed into a pejorative term. The language itself literally acts as a fossil record, documenting a historical shift in social attitudes. So the crucial point is how we actually analyze all of this systematically. Scholar Sarah Mills established a brilliant three-level analysis to figure out exactly who is being heard and who is being silenced in any text. At the word level, we check for those naming asymmetries we just talked about. Down at the phrase level, we look at who gets to be an active agent and who gets reduced to a passive object. And finally, at the discourse level, we ask the big question: whose overall point of view is governing this text? It's a super rigorous framework for taking the invisible dynamics of power and making them totally, undeniably visible.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, Big Data Meets Linguistics.
Okay, so here we zoom way out. We move from manually close reading a single text to looking at things on an incredible massive scale. When we start using giant electronic collections of texts, which linguists call corpora, we can use computers to spot statistical patterns that a human reader could simply never ever see on their own. One of the coolest patterns is called collocation. This is basically the statistically significant co-occurrence of two or more words near each other. By running literally millions of words through this software, we can see exactly which words an author unconsciously glues together in their mind. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of that big data. Imagine comparing all of Charles Dickens' novels against a massive reference corpus of just standard, everyday Victorian prose. The computer runs a keyword analysis and mathematically proves that Dickens dramatically overused specific character naming strategies and social class vocabulary compared to his peers. He had a mathematically distinct worldview that we can literally chart and graph. We aren't just guessing about his unique style anymore, right? We have the statistical receipts.
All right, let's get into the really heavy stuff. Section 5, Catching Criminals with Words.
Because what happens when we bring these exact same analytical tools into a context where the stakes are literal life or death? Welcome to forensic stylistics. The entire foundation of this field rests on a concept called the idiolect. The idea here is that every single speaker has a completely unique, stable, individual language pattern. Your vocabulary choices, the way you build your syntax, even your weird little punctuation habits, they all form an aggregate that is uniquely yours. And because no two people on Earth share the exact same idiolect, investigators can mathematically link a disputed text, like, say, a ransom note or a threat, to a specific suspect. It acts as a literal, undeniable linguistic fingerprint. The gripping true crime story that basically launched this entire field involves a man named Timothy Evans. Back in 1950, Evans was wrongfully convicted of murder and tragically hanged, largely based on his supposed written confessions. But jump ahead to 1968, and a linguist named Jan Svartvik decides to analyze those statements. Through rigorous stylistic analysis, he demonstrated that the grammar and vocabulary in those confessions bore the undeniable statistical hallmarks of police-composed language, not Evans' own natural speech patterns. That linguistic evidence of police fabrication actually contributed to a posthumous pardon for Evans. And just like that, forensic linguistics was born. So what exactly is in the forensic detective's toolkit? When they do this authorship attribution, what are they looking for? Well, they usually don't look at the big, fancy words. They look at the incredibly boring stuff. Function word frequency, literally how often you use the words the, of, and. They measure average sentence length, your preferred syntactic constructions, and your spelling habits. The brilliant thing about this is that these are your most deeply unconscious habits. If a criminal tries to disguise their writing, they might change their vocabulary or use some slang, but they almost never think to change how often they use the word of. It is literally the hardest thing to hide. Finally, let's bring it all back to you in Section 6, your new linguistic superpower. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, right? From 19th century novels all the way to high-stakes police interrogation rooms. Now I want to turn this lens directly onto you. One of the key founders of this field, H.G. Widdowson, strongly believed that stylistics wasn't just some dusty academic exercise for people in ivory towers. He championed this idea of literary competence, essentially knowing the underlying rules of the language game. But even more broadly than that, it's about giving everyone what we call language awareness. When you finally understand how foregrounding grabs your attention, or how active and passive voice frames reality, or how metaphors literally map your mind, you can quite literally see through the matrix of all communication around you. Which leaves us with this final thought for the explainer. You now possess the analytical vocabulary to see what was once totally invisible to you. You know how to look for the idiolect, you know how to spot semantic derogation, and you can see those hidden choices that build the texts all around us. So now that you can see the code, whose hidden fingerprints will you spot in the very next thing you read?